Yes. All right. So if you were around last week, if you missed the show, check it out. Steve did a excellent demo on Linkerd, and now we're going to get into Istio. So for those of you who are unaware, there are kind of two, maybe three heavyweights in terms of the service mesh. You have Linkerd, you have Istio, and then I believe console would technically be considered a service mesh. Is it?
Let's say yeah.
Yeah, we'll say yes, just for the sake of me continuing my rant. So sidecar architecture, just for people who are unaware, if you go into Istio, you go into the docs. Istio is a little bit of a, let's say, user interface for the Envoy proxy. So Envoy proxy gets injected as a sidecar, pulls a bunch of metrics of your application, and then reports it back to Citadel. I believe Citadel is the UI, Galley is the database. Don't quote me on that. But if you want to know exactly about the architecture, it's all here in the docs. We talk about all the aspects of Envoy. And it was originally created as a collaborative project between Google and IBM. It's pretty interesting. So Google and IBM originally created it. I don't believe it was Kubernetes specific. It was somewhat of a, I think, container. I think it was more container focused originally, but it's written in C++. So if you're around for Linkerd, Linkerd is written in Rust. This is written in C++. Istio is a little bit more heavy than Linkerd, but I'm not going to do any performance benchmarking. So that's just what I've seen from the other benchmarks that are out there. Don't
It's
quote me
also
on
one
it.
of their taglines on Linkerd, I mean.
Yeah, that's true too. But yeah, so Istio basically uses the Envoy proxy. And then just collects it and builds a ton of functionality into it. Now, what is pretty awesome, if you want to go to getting started, Istio has its own CLI. So you can download Istio, basically export it, add it to your command line, and then, yeah, there's this awesome demo right here. Are you taking a photo of me? I saw that.
I am, yeah. I've never taken
Nice.
it. This is kind of a cool setup for Twitter.
Yeah. So Istio CTL install set profile demo. So there are a couple different profiles and things that you can install. So Istio core, Istio D gets installed, egress, ingress. It does install Grafana and Prometheus as well for the demo profile. And it has a sample application. And this sample application gets installed into the default namespace, where you then, so here's what we're applying all of the book info gateways. And then what we are going to do, so this is the Kali dashboard. Wait, where do we inject it? Oh, here it is. So kubectl label namespace default Istio injection equals enabled. And basically any application that gets put into the default namespace is going to go through a mutating admission controller. That metadata is going to get a little fix, and then a sidecar is going to get injected. Istio has admin permissions to go and create a sidecar next to whatever pods that you create. And you have to do this before deployment too, right? This is one of the interesting things. If you delete a namespace and then you bring up an application and then you change it, it will not mutate existing resources. It will only do it on, it does make sense. But in terms of a lot of workflows, like a lot of Helm charts, a lot of automation, a lot of CD deployments, right? Like if you have these auto deploying aspects, it does change a lot, because if you look at namespaces as sort of this wall, a lot of people like to just have a Helm chart and then just say, okay, delete namespace. And then just, when you delete the namespace, it wipes all the resources. Well, you can't really do that the same way, right? Because when you bring it up, you have to bring it up, auto inject it, create the rule, and then bring in your application. So just a little bit of a workflow change. I don't want to say anti-pattern, because it's not an anti-pattern and we have a bingo card that we need to create. But yeah, just slightly different aspects there. So
okay,
I didn't use the application that they gave, because I was like, oh, let's try to keep things, the same as last week. So of course we have our socks. And for anybody watching, if you want to go check out that IP address, you can go and see if you can break the web application. It's public. And I have a little load balancer running against it as well. Not load balancer, just a little application running in the background, checking the paths and creating some traffic to the application. But yeah, I got 2 items in my cart. I'm feeling colorful today, so let's get a couple of those. Ooh, well, I'm not going to do that for you guys.
Yeah, I just had a credit card now.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe a Kanye sock. It's a little holy. Maybe your Sunday socks for $100. And
DIY that.
yeah. So what's interesting is Istio needs a dashboard to showcase all of this information. Kiali is a open source dashboard to do that. If you're using something like Google, they have a Anthos specific dashboard to visualize Istio components. But yeah, so if you go in, if you want to check out Linkerd, it's something similar. Now, this took a while for the graph to show up like this. Just if I were to do last minute, I believe, it still holds the structure. But when I was first starting this, it was all over the place because until it figures out all the paths and all the requests, you don't get this succinct, well-ordered structure. So it was interesting. This thing keeps popping up. I don't know why this happens. It just ships over here and then pops up over here. But my biggest complaint is you can't move these around.
Okay, so if it's messy, you can't. You want to? Do you need to?
Yeah, do you need to? I don't know, but yeah, it's just certain views. I'm just kind of like, what is the point of this view?
Oh, this is like the criticism I had of Linkerd view last time. I wanted to click on it. I wanted to click on it and get lots more information, and it just wasn't happening the way I expected.
I will say so. I do kind of like the way they visualize these components. The triangle is a service, and the square is the application itself.
Okay, I like that.
Okay, so you can say, oh, we have traffic into the front end service. Here's your total. Here's your success rate. Here's your error rate.
I completely missed that. That's changing. Oh, when you click on that, you do get additional information over there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so I can go and click on front end, and you can see the type of request that's made between them. So you could say, oh, it's HTTP, request traffic, request per second. There's the error rate, response time. This is the last 10 seconds too. So it is refreshing pretty regularly. It's going and pulling all these metrics pretty often. I can just say, okay, let's do every 5 minutes. Right. It just depends on, it's kind of like a Grafana dashboard. How often are you scraping, Istio D, I forget which one's the database, but which component in Istio is the database. But yeah, you're going and scraping for all the information. And what we can do is we can go into the details of this service. And we can look at the endpoints, we can look at the ports, the users, the inbound traffic, request per second, percent success, and the metrics as well. So this is a pretty in-depth dashboard for Istio. Like there is a lot of aspects here: request volume, duration, size. Obviously, it's not using gRPCs, so that won't be there. TPC received and sent is there. Yeah, there's a lot. So what I found really interesting was the services aspect and how this configuration is here. So we can sort by health, and we can see that there are a couple of aspects that I haven't necessarily, there's not enough information there for me going to like the cart or anything like that for it to give me a green check. But we could say, hey, go to front end. Let's see what's going on. We have a 1% error rate, and maybe that's in the yellow. That's not what we like. And what we can do is we can say we can create different rules into the services. So we can have request routing. We can add a route rule, request matching any request. So specific requests, we can say, hey, don't go to this specific service, go somewhere else. And we can inject faults, so we can add delays. So if you want to do a little bit of chaos engineering and you're in the dev environment and you're running a load and you're saying, hey, the front end's not really keeping up with the amount of load that we're giving it, that we're testing it out with, maybe we add some faults and see how it handles it, right? Request timeouts. We can set up gateways, traffic policies, circuit breaker rules, all for that specific service. And really, this is the massive benefit of a service mesh, is you have such fine-grained network control over an individual service, in an individual container, right? There's that sidecar architecture allows that. Now, it's not the only architecture that you can set up. You could do something like what Citrix does, which is you set up a type of Envoy, like their own version of what Envoy proxy does, and it's just a single one on a node. It's deployed like a daemon set, and it measures all this traffic, just not at the individual container level. That architecture is okay. The trade-off has a real Argo CD vibe. Looks good. Yeah. Oh, Jason's watching. Yeah, it's this is also Kali too. So I've seen Anthos. Anthos has a very similar functionality when they have it set up and they're pulling the Istio configuration and details. But I found it almost too overwhelming. Because here's what's the use case for it? The use case is you want to get super fine grained with your network controls. So, okay, well, that's a very mature thing to get to in Kubernetes. Like you're at the point where you have a complete grasp on your deployment cycle and everything's in production, and now you just realize you're at you have a couple too many request issues and you need to change it, or you want to do some sort of specific routing. So I'm wondering the use case for that. The other aspect is I just don't find, when you're working with microservices at this scale, I don't find it intuitive. I think the metrics and the information is really useful to go and make a decision with your developers as to how you're architecting your application. But I don't think I would make changes through this dashboard. I don't think I would go and create services like this. I don't know, just me. I would want to, I mean, maybe if it was giving recommendations, it wouldn't be too bad, but it just wouldn't be the workflow that I choose. I'm not sure. Yeah. Any thoughts on your end, Steve?
No. That's kind of why I wanted to do this comparison, because it's just a little bit like I have yet to see. Well, we've kind of talked about this before. There's so much going on here, and I think the key word you said was maturity. Is like somebody getting to the point where this, like, they're really getting deep into this. I hope we get to a point where this is the abstraction layer upon which we are operating. That'd be good. It's almost a little bit ahead of its time, but I don't know. That's kind of where I'm sitting right now. I think it looks cool.
I mean, this is why the service mesh wars of what, 2018, 2019 at KubeCon were so big. It was the new shiny toy that came out, and everybody was.
They were the jingly keys, weren't they? Ooh, look at the shiny.
Listen, it is really cool, and I believe that so unhealthy nodes. There's a lot here.
Like, my brain is now thinking, like, what happens if you install Cilium underneath Istio, and now you've got an eBPF layer managing and observing security with really make it complicated, and put Istio on top. No reason why that wouldn't work.
Yeah,
that'd be kind of neat.
Mm-hmm. I think the other really useful, and I kind of overlooked this too as a use case, you can see how users move through your application at such fine-grained detail, right? You could see where a lot of the load gets placed. You can watch people as they come in and go front order to order, and you can control as your users go through and you see what the workflow that they like, you can, set up rules or create resources there to move them through it, right? Like if you realize that, I mean, I can't really do it with this sock shop, but like, let's say you're Netflix and people come through and you want to A/B test. Well, you have a very, very useful way of setting that up, of setting two applications and then just weighting the difference of people going through. So, and then getting all the information from that. The biggest question I have is performance, right? So one, can you even deploy it into production at scale without slowing down? And then two, this is a lot of information. So I'm assuming that this is going to be pretty heavy on the system.
Yeah.
And
yeah, that makes sense.
You're installing this and you're going to probably install this on a managed service platform. It's probably going to be like an XKS or an OpenShift or a Tanzu or something like that, because not a lot of people, I'd say I haven't heard of a use case where somebody's managing their own Kubernetes system and using open source Istio, right?
Yeah. Yeah, just the work involved. So you want push button Istio.
Yeah.
If at all.
I mean, I think that's what Anthos tried to accommodate, right? It's, hey, we're going to sell you Anthos. Here's Istio, but we're going to support it. And then they realized that supporting Istio for a multi-hybrid platform was a lot of work. Just getting the Google version of just getting GKE on-prem was a lot.
Yes. So the question, I think I said I had a question before we started this, and I was going to hold back. So the thing that I saw that I was really keen about, and yeah, actually you have touched on it, is like doing sort of blue-green deployments or canary deployments at scale. This can be helpful for that. But that seemed like a pretty nuanced part of this, like, and not the obvious functionality that I'd heard about. I didn't know if you heard about, if that was something there's no way you would have got into that in this demo, but that seemed like something that maybe wasn't available on Linkerd. And if we do have someone watching that can clear that up, that seemed like a pretty interesting extra perk for this, because of the way you're monitoring and crossing traffic over into something. If this helps with that, that's cool. I just didn't quite understand out of the box how it did that.
I do like these, the logs. I mean, it's just really, in terms of bang for your buck information, it's really great. I mean, you can click on a service, click on a workload, and then you can go through and really get fine-grained with it. The amount of information here is significant. The
Linkerd dashboard was all right, but this Kali looks like next level. It's funny, when I first heard of Kali, I saw it advertised as service mesh visualization. I thought, oh, this is really cool. And it's like, but it only works with Istio? Well, it's not. Cloud native visualization, it's just one thing, actually. I think it's only Istio, isn't it?
That's a good question. Istio. There's so many tools. I mean, Istio uses Envoy, right? So it's like, is Istio?
Oh, maybe yeah.
It's like 3 open source projects in one, right? There's a lot going on there.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, this is good. It looks crazy. I'm happy you did this one and I did the other one.
Yeah, there's a lot of things I'm glossing over too. Like you have Istio routes. There's a bunch of different configurations that you can set up. And there was a problem apparently. So
okay, it's demo.
I just didn't like that. But yeah, like this is and this is a simple application. There's other ones that they have on their website if you want to check it out. The getting started, I mean, I don't know how simple Linkerd was. It's one thing I haven't tested on my cluster, but getting started with Istio was fairly simple. Istio CTL was useful. You install it wherever you have your kubeconfig file, and it goes and injects all the applications, all the basically similar to Linkerd, right? Goes and changes the metadata and then injects the sidecar. So
yeah, sounds very similar.
Yeah, I think in terms of setup it is. So yeah, there you go. Next steps. So congratulations, you've installed your demo. Here's the next things you want to check out. traffic shifting, fault injection, request routing. This is probably the thing that I would focus on is what are the deployment best practice and what are the requirements? There's a
Yeah, I think it looks really, really thorough. And I think we once talked about service meshes as people just wanted MTLS or something like that. And
yeah.
then they would go down the path of Istio, and it's like sledgehammer to crack a nut kind of scenario.
Yeah, there was a I wonder if it's like a legal requirement and there are people who, hey, you need to have encryption between services, and I go, we can't run containers then, we can only run virtual machines, and then the requests have to come out encrypted. And yeah, I see the use case, and that really is one, because you have that sidecar architecture, you can encrypt all the traffic. That's very heavy though, and you think about it too, because I'm still showing my dashboard. Oh no, I moved away from the architecture. Where'd it go? I don't know. Anyways, so oh, there it is. Yeah, because you think about it. So you have, microservice A, microservice B. You're going out to the proxy. It's getting encrypted. It's going over to the proxy. It's getting decrypted, and then it's going to the container. I remember when we first did an evaluation 2 or 3 years ago when I was working at CloudOps, it was 6 milliseconds extra for each jump. So you think about it like 6. This was a couple of years ago. Yeah, we did an evaluation for a company who, for that reason, was looking to implement service mesh, and we're just like, there are better ways to do this. You do not need that sort of time. So if that, I think that's why something like Linkerd, I think the lightweight aspect matters so much more. It just gets, say if you're running in production, I'd almost say that being lightweight and simplified version is probably a better introduction to a service mesh to get it up and running.
Yeah, and then figure out what it's missing and what it is you really cannot do before you decide to go with the tank and roll in with something that big. It's it's funny. I think the from coming from the security angle, when people think like service mesh, it sounds good to them, right? Because of the encryption, etc. And then they start looking at what are the security possibilities associated with Istio, and we used to hear like, oh, I can do layer 7 rules. So that appeals to me as a security professional.
Yeah.
Therefore, I want it, without really considering, the actual overheads in terms of just understanding the labor, potential to get it wrong.
You have a mutating admission controller in the cluster, right? There's there's a little bit of a trade-off there, and especially like if you have something that's heavy that's slowing people down, or it's going to bring production down, there's just a lot. And so I feel like unless it is a very well oiled service mesh, you're trading one problem for another.